March 12, 1945, 06:40 hours, near the Rhine outside Remagen. The morning air is sharp enough to bite. Frost clings to torn hedgerows and the twisted remains of an orchard shelled into splinters sometime before dawn. Somewhere close, a diesel engine coughs, catches, then settles into a low, patient growl. You can hear boots in the mud, slow, tired, dragging more than marching. And then there is the smell. Not cordite, not wet wool, not the sour tang of unwashed bodies packed into greatcoats for weeks on end. This smell is wrong. Sweet, warm, familiar in a way that hurts. A group of German prisoners stands behind a loose wire enclosure marked by white-painted stakes. Feldgrau uniforms hang off them like borrowed coats. Some have strips torn from blankets wrapped around their feet where boots once were. Their breath clouds the air as they stamp for warmth, eyes following the American trucks rumbling past on a churned-up road that only exists because engineers forced it into being. One of the prisoners, an Unteroffizier, judging by the ghost outline where his stripes used to be, lifts his head. He sniffs again. His brow creases, not with fear, but confusion. It smells like a bakery. A U.S. Army deuce-and-a-half slows as it approaches a cluster of tents marked with chalk numbers and stenciled unit codes. The truck is spattered with mud from the Ardennes, its canvas sides stiff with frozen grime. The driver leans out, cigarette clenched between his teeth, and shouts something to a waiting quartermaster. Laughter follows, casual, easy. The tailgate drops. Inside the truck are wooden crates, clean crates, stenciled neatly in black, no scavenged markings, no rushed repairs. A corporal jumps up, pries one open with a practiced motion, and lifts the lid. The smell spills out. Chocolate, sugar, baked flour, real butter. The German prisoners go still. For weeks, months, really, their world has been reduced to a brutal arithmetic. Calories versus cold, ammunition versus men, horses versus hunger. They have eaten things that were never meant to be eaten. They have boiled leather, scraped mold, and argued over crusts frozen so hard they had to be shattered with rifle butts. And now, standing behind wire, guarded by soldiers who look well-fed, they are smelling cake. Not rations masquerading as dessert, not ersatz substitutes made from beet sugar and hope. Cake. An American private lifts one out carefully as if it matters. It's round, frosted, a little cracked on one edge from the journey, but intact. Someone has written on it in white icing. Happy birthday, Charlie. The Unteroffizier blinks, once, twice. Across the field, another truck rolls in, then another. Jeeps dart between them like nervous insects, tires hissing through wet gravel. Engineers move with clipboards. MPs joke with drivers. A field kitchen fires up, and the metallic clatter of mess tins rings out, bright and cheerful, against the low thunder of distant artillery. The prisoners exchange looks. No one speaks. They had been told the Americans were finished, soft, dependent on comfort, an army of factories that would collapse once the fighting got hard, once the supply lines stretched too far, once winter closed its fist. Instead, here, at the very edge of Germany, there is cake. Delivered on time. One of the prisoners finally mutters something under his breath. Another shakes his head slowly, as if trying to wake himself. A third laughs. It comes out wrong, too sharp, too loud, and he clamps his mouth shut, suddenly aware of how close the guards are. An American sergeant notices them watching. He glances at the cake, then back at the prisoners. For a moment, there's something like curiosity in his eyes, then indifference. He's got a job to do. The cake is carried away toward a command tent, where Captain Charlie, presumably, is about to turn another year older in the middle of a war. Behind the wire, the Unteroffizier feels something shift. It isn't just hunger he understands. It's the realization that this army is fighting on a different plane entirely. That while his unit froze and starved and waited for orders that never came, the enemy was organizing birthdays. Across an ocean, across a continent, across a battlefield that had already swallowed millions. The trucks keep coming, the smell lingers. And for the first time since the war began, one of the prisoners wonders, not how Germany can still win, but how it ever thought it could. The cake disappears into the command tent, the flap falls shut, life goes on. That, more than anything, is what unsettles them. By mid-morning, the temperature rises just enough to turn the ground into a thick, sucking mire. Boots come off the earth with a sound like tearing cloth. Somewhere beyond the low ridge, American artillery fires again, measured, methodical. No panic, no rush. The guns speak, pause, then speak again, as if time itself is being rationed and spent wisely. The German prisoners are moved in a group toward a processing area. Not marched, guided. A pair of MPs with white armbands walk alongside them, rifles slung low, fingers nowhere near the triggers. One of the prisoners notices that their boots are clean, not parade ground clean, but intact, proper soles, fresh laces. As they shuffle forward, they pass a line of trucks stretching back along the road. Some are unloading ammunition, olive drab crates stamped with lot numbers and dates. Others carry fuel drums, neatly stacked, secured with chains. Still others carry things that make no tactical sense at all. Eisen, fresh meat packed in straw. Mailbags bulging and stained with travel. A portable refrigeration unit hums steadily, a sound none of the Germans have heard near the front in years. It's the sound of certainty, of excess capacity, of a system that assumes tomorrow will come and plans accordingly. One of the prisoners, formerly a driver in a panzer division, can't stop staring at the vehicles. He recognizes the design logic immediately: standardized parts, interchangeable components, tires that actually match. He had spent weeks cannibalizing wrecks just to keep one truck running long enough to retreat 10 kilometers. Here, trucks arrive, unload, and leave again, engines barely cooling. A field kitchen has been set up near a hedgerow. Steam rises from metal vats. The smell is not thin, watery soup. It's thick, savory, real. American soldiers line up with mess tins, joking, shoving, arguing about baseball scores and leave rotations. Someone produces a harmonica. A tune starts, off-key but cheerful. The prisoners are given rations of their own. White bread, coffee, actual coffee. One man stares at the mug in his hands as if it might vanish if he looks too closely. Another breaks his bread in half and hides a piece inside his coat by reflex, shame flickering across his face when he realizes no one is trying to take it. The Unteroffizier remembers a briefing from 2 winters ago. A political officer, voice tight with urgency, explaining that American industry was clumsy, inefficient, dependent on comfort and luxury. They cannot fight a long war, the man had insisted. They will collapse once their people tire of sacrifice. The Unteroffizier looks at the trucks. He looks at the bread. He thinks of his last weeks before capture, digging frozen potatoes out of fields already stripped bare, boiling horse bones until they crumbled into nothing, watching men argue over whether sawdust could still be mixed into flour. And then there is the cake. He doesn't see it again, but he knows it's there, being cut, being eaten, forks scraping against real plates, someone laughing as icing smears across their fingers, a birthday being marked not with a whispered wish to survive the night, but with candles. The prisoners are processed efficiently, names recorded, units noted, no shouting, no beatings, just a system clicking into place, smoothly, impersonally, like a well-oiled machine that has done this thousands of times before and will do it thousands of times again. One of the younger Germans finally asks a question in hesitant English. He gestures toward the trucks, the kitchen, the general abundance. How he begins, then stops, unable to finish. An American private shrugs as he hands him a cup of coffee. Ships, he says, lots of them. That's it, no boasting, no explanation, just a statement of fact. Ships. The word lands heavily. Because ships mean ports, and ports mean cranes, and cranes mean schedules, and schedules mean planners who assume supplies will arrive not just today, but next week and the week after that. It means an enemy who is not improvising anymore. By the afternoon, rain begins to fall. A cold, steady drizzle that soaks wool and seeps into bones. The Americans adapt instantly. Canvas is tightened, duckboards are laid, drainage channels appear as if by magic. The camp remains functional, dry enough, warm enough. The prisoners huddle under cover, watching as a soldier emerges from a tent carrying the empty cake box. He folds it, tucks it under his arm, and tosses it onto a growing pile of refuse already being sorted for disposal. Even the trash is organized. The Unteroffizier closes his eyes for a moment. He imagines German supply officers trying to explain a birthday cake to a frontline unit in 1945. He imagines the laughter, the disbelief, the inevitable accusation of defeatism. When he opens his eyes, the American flag flutters above the camp, damp but steady. The realization settles slowly, like cold into the joints. This war was not being decided by bravery alone, or even by weapons. It was being decided by whether an army could afford to celebrate a birthday at the front and still have enough left to keep advancing tomorrow. And for the first time, the prisoners understand that what they are witnessing is not a miracle. It is routine. Night comes early near the Rhine, drawn down by low clouds and the steady drip of rain. Floodlights snap on around the American encampment, casting long white beams across the mud. Generators thrum, radios crackle. Somewhere, a typewriter hammers out orders that will be obeyed tomorrow without question. Behind the wire, the German prisoners settle into uneasy stillness. This is the hour when doubts grow teeth. The Unteroffizier lies on his side, staring at the canvas above him. The smell of chocolate still seems to cling to the air, ghost-like and impossible. He knows it isn't really there anymore, but his mind won't let it go. It has become a symbol, a wound, proof of something vast and impersonal that no act of courage could ever undo. He thinks back to the early days of the war, the speed, the confidence, columns of armor rolling forward while supply trucks struggled to keep up, engines overheating, tires shredding on bad roads. Back then, it hadn't mattered. Victory came faster than shortages. Momentum covered mistakes. But momentum does not bake cakes. Momentum does not build refrigeration units, or ship millions of tons of fuel across oceans, or replace worn boots before they fall apart. Across the camp, an American soldier sits on an ammo crate, writing a letter by lantern light. He pauses, chews the end of his pencil, then smiles to himself and keeps going. Somewhere back home, someone is waiting for that letter. Somewhere farther still, factories are running night shifts, loading ships, scheduling trains, planning next month's deliveries. The Unteroffizier realizes something then, something that tightens his chest more than hunger ever did. This war was over long before he was captured. Not on a map, not in a surrender ceremony, but in the quiet decisions made years ago in places he never saw, in boardrooms and shipyards, in training depots and logistics offices where men obsessed over tonnage, timing, redundancy. The Americans didn't just fight battles. They prepared for birthdays. Around him, other prisoners murmur softly. One whispers about his family in Hamburg. Another stares silently at the lights, as if trying to memorize them. A third laughs again, quietly this time, not from humor, but from the absurdity of it all. The guards change shifts with clockwork precision. Fresh soldiers arrive, alert, equipped, calm. No one looks desperate. No one looks like they're holding the line with their fingernails. At some point, a jeep rolls past, headlights hooded, splashing through puddles that would have swallowed German vehicles whole. Its engine sounds healthy, confident, alive. The Unteroffizier closes his eyes and sees the contrast as if it's carved into his thoughts. German columns stalled for want of fuel, horses collapsing in snow, men counting bullets, officers lying to their units because the truth would break them. And here, cakes, coffee, mail, and music. He understands now why resistance had felt so futile in those last weeks, why American attacks never seemed to pause long enough to fail, why even their mistakes were absorbed and corrected, while German mistakes became catastrophes. This wasn't just an enemy with more men or better weapons. It was an enemy with margin, with slack in the system, with the ability to lose a ship, a truck, a depot, and keep going, to waste cake crumbs without consequence. That gap could not be closed by sacrifice, or bravery, or ideology. Only by time and industry. And Germany had run out of both. As the camp settles into sleep, rain pattering softly on canvas, the Unteroffizier finally lets go of the last illusion he's been carrying since 1939. The belief that the enemy was fragile, that comfort was weakness. The truth is colder than the night air. Comfort, when it is earned by logistics, is power. Beyond the wire, the American camp hums steadily, preparing for another day of advance, another set of orders, another birthday somewhere, marked with icing and candles. Behind the wire, the prisoners lie awake, listening, knowing that the distance between them and victory is no longer measured in kilometers, but in a gap that can never be crossed. Morning does not arrive gently. It comes with engines. At 05:30 hours, the camp stirs as if responding to a single pulse. Diesel motors bark awake one after another. Canvas flaps snap open. Boots hit duckboards with hollow, confident thuds. Coffee is already brewing, strong enough that even behind the wire, the smell cuts through damp wool and old smoke. The German prisoners sit up, instinctively bracing for chaos. None comes. Instead, they watch something far more unsettling: order. A convoy assembles with almost no shouted commands. Trucks fall into line, spacing perfect, loads balanced. Drivers consult clipboards, not maps scrawled in pencil. Engineers check tire pressure. Mechanics replace a faulty fan belt without drama, without delay. The old one is tossed aside. There is another ready. There is always another. The Unteroffizier notices that no one is rushing. No one looks afraid of being late. Time here feels abundant, like fuel in an overfilled tank. He remembers mornings on the Eastern Front when engines refused to start in the cold, when half the unit stood idle while officers screamed and men beat frozen metal with numb hands. He remembers watching Soviet shells creep closer while tracks sat useless, sacrificed to shortages no one could admit aloud. Here, the Americans roll out on schedule. As the convoy departs, a sergeant walks the line of prisoners, counting heads, nodding absently. He pauses, glances at them, and says something almost offhand. "You'll be moving back later today. Rail transport." Rail. The word ripples through the group. Rail transport means capacity, planning, control of territory deep enough that tracks can be repaired faster than they're destroyed. It means switching yards, timetables, guards, food along the route. It means thinking not just about capturing prisoners, but feeding them tomorrow. One of the Germans finally speaks, voice hoarse. "You have too much," he says, half accusation, half wonder. The sergeant chuckles. "Nah," he replies, "we just got enough." Enough. The Unteroffizier turns that word over in his mind. Enough food to bake cakes, enough fuel to idle engines, enough men to rotate guards without exhausting them, enough ships that losing one barely registers. Enough to win a world war. Later that morning, as the prisoners are marched toward the railhead, they pass through ground that was a battlefield only days earlier. Burned-out German vehicles lie abandoned in ditches, their crews long gone. A half-track sits nose down in mud, tracks torn loose, engine cannibalized beyond saving. Beside it, an American bulldozer shoves debris aside, clearing a new road. Its engine roars with brute confidence, steel treads biting into earth that had swallowed men whole just weeks before. The prisoners watch in silence. This is what finally breaks them. Not defeat, not capture, not even hunger. It is witnessing a force that erases obstacles as a matter of routine. At the railhead, boxcars wait, cleaned, marked, guarded. Inside, straw has been laid, water barrels secured. rations stacked neatly in corners. The Americans load the prisoners efficiently, almost gently, as if processing freight that must arrive intact. As the doors slide shut, the Unteroffizier catches one last glimpse of the camp, of tents aligned like teeth, of trucks already returning from the front, empty and ready for new loads, of smoke rising not from burning cities, but from kitchens. He finally understands what his commanders never admitted. The war was not lost because Germany lacked courage. It was lost because courage cannot replace infrastructure. As the train lurches forward, steel wheels clattering into rhythm, the Unteroffizier leans back against the wooden wall. Around him, men sit quietly, staring at nothing, their faces hollowed not just by defeat, but by clarity. Somewhere far behind them now, a birthday cake has been eaten and forgotten. But the truth it revealed will linger long after the last crumb is gone. Because once you see an army that can afford to forget luxuries, you know you are facing something unstoppable. The train moves west. Not fast, not slow, precisely fast enough. Each junction it passes has been repaired, cleared, scheduled. Signals flash and change without hesitation. Somewhere ahead, an unseen dispatcher has already decided this train's priority, slotted it into a timetable crowded with armor, fuel, ammunition, and men moving in the opposite direction, toward the front. Toward victory. Inside the boxcar, the rhythm of the wheels becomes hypnotic. Men sway slightly with each turn, gripping straps or resting against the walls. No one speaks much now. Conversation feels pointless, almost embarrassing, like arguing after the verdict has already been read. The Unteroffizier stares at the stamped markings on the interior beams. Dates, factory codes, serial numbers. Even the car itself has a story, a place of origin, a schedule, a purpose that will continue long after he is gone. He thinks back to German rail movements late in the war, trains halted for lack of coal, lines bombed and never repaired, priority shipments arguing with one another on paper while the front starved in reality, officers begging for locomotives that no longer existed. Here, rail is not a gamble. It is a guarantee. At one stop, the doors slide open briefly, guards check counts, water is replenished, a medic glances inside, scanning faces for sickness or injury, efficient, almost bored. The train does not linger. As it pulls away again, one of the prisoners laughs softly, shaking his head. "They planned for us," he says, "even before we surrendered." No one argues, because that is the final, bitter understanding settling over them now. The Americans did not react to German collapse. They anticipated it. Years earlier, somewhere far away, men who would never see this boxcar calculated how many prisoners would need to be fed, guarded, transporting. They built the excess capacity in advance, not because they were sentimental, but because they were thorough. The Unteroffizier feels a strange mixture of resentment and relief. Resentment that his own leaders dismissed such planning as weakness. Relief that, at least now, survival no longer depends on improvisation or luck. As the train continues, the landscape changes, ruins thin out, roads improve, villages appear less shattered, evidence of an advancing order replacing chaos. He realizes that for all the talk of ideology, destiny, and sacrifice, this war had been decided by quieter things. Standardized crates, spare parts inventories, refrigerated holds, rail timetables, and men whose entire job was to make sure a birthday cake arrived on time. That is the war they were never fighting. They were fighting battles. The Americans were fighting the calendar. As dusk approaches, the train slows again, heading toward a larger processing camp somewhere deeper in Allied territory. Ahead lies captivity, years perhaps, uncertainty, a future without uniforms or ranks. But also food, shelter, predictability. Behind them, the front will continue to move east, powered not just by tanks and guns, but by the invisible weight of logistics pressing forward day after day, mile after mile. The Unteroffizier closes his eyes, finally exhausted. The image that stays with him is not the wire, not the guards, not even the defeat. It is a cake, carried carefully through the mud of a battlefield, and treated as something normal. The train stops just after sunset. Not with a jolt, but with a measured sigh of brakes releasing pressure. Doors slide open. Floodlights bloom across the siding, illuminating rows of tents, watchtowers, and neatly marked lanes stamped into the earth. Another camp, larger, deeper, more permanent. The German prisoners step down one by one. Here there is no sense of the front, no artillery rumble, no urgency. This place exists because someone, months earlier, decided it would be needed. Barracks stand in clean lines, latrines are dug properly, medical tents are staffed and stocked. Signs point in clear block letters, POWs medical mess. Nothing is improvised. As they are counted and redirected, the Unteroffizier notices something small but devastating. A bulletin board near the mess tent, notices pinned in orderly rows, baseball scores from home, a dance announcement for a USO group rotating through rear areas, a typed menu for the week. Monday, stew. Tuesday, meatloaf. Wednesday, cake listed again, this time without occasion. Just a cake. He looks away. That night, lying on a real cot for the first time in months, he stares at the ceiling and understands the final truth of it all. The Americans never needed to convince German soldiers they would lose. They let logistics do it for them. Every warm meal, every intact boot, every replaced engine part, every birthday observed at the edge of a battlefield quietly eroded belief until surrender felt less like failure and more like gravity. Around him, men sleep deeply, some for the first uninterrupted hours in years. Their bodies give in before their pride does. Outside, generators hum steadily, indifferent to who listens. Somewhere far away, ships are already crossing the Atlantic, not reacting to anything that happened today, because today was already planned for. That is the power the prisoners finally grasp. Wars are not only won by destroying what the enemy has. They are won by proving, again and again, that you can afford tomorrow. The Unteroffizier closes his eyes. The smell of chocolate is gone now, but the understanding it carried will never leave him.